All right, everybody, we're here. We're going to get started on our next book, our last novel, Detectives and Togas. Now, you'll notice I'm not at my house. In fact, I'm not in Redlands at all. We decided to fly out to our country villa about 30 miles outside of Rome in Italy. I know we're not supposed to travel, but they made an exception for me and my family. So we're here. And I'm going to read this book to you before we get started. I'll talk a little bit about it. It is a great book. I know you've been looking forward to it. Detectives in Togas. And it is a mystery, so I want you to pay attention to all the little clues that we go along the way. If you notice, my ears might disappear from time to time and my head might get misshapen. That's just what happens in Italy. It's just different here. Okay, so I did want to tell you that in this is from the author. He said during the 1936 excavations in Pompeii, which is near Rome, not too far away, a temple wall came to light on which had been scribbled in a childish hand the words "Caius Asinus Est." That's Roman. And it means, or it says, that scrawl came from the days of ancient Rome. It was the inspiration for this book. So in reality, there really was an excavation on an ancient temple in Pompeii, and they did find that a youngster had essentially tagged this building, this temple. And so the author read this story and thought, man, I wonder who did that? I wonder what went on. I wonder what caused it. I wonder why that ancient Roman boy decided to write on a temple wall. And that was the inspiration for this book and this story. So we're going to get started with it and see how it goes. This first chapter is called The Wrong Lantern, Chapter 1. Mucius raised his head in surprise. The entire class had gone suddenly off into gales of laughter, and he did not know why. He had been concentrating on his work and had not noticed what was happening in the classroom. Now he saw that Rufus had left his seat and was standing near the wall behind their teacher's Antipas. He must have sneaked past the teacher. Quite a trick if you could get away with it. Hanging from a big nail on the wall was a map of the Roman Empire, and on this nail Rufus had hung one of his wax writing tablets. He had scratched on it in big crooked letters, "Caius is a dumbbell." Dumbbell, like calling somebody an idiot or a dummy. The joke went over big because Caius really was not very bright. Rufus grinned and bowed like an actor on the stage. Xanthippus, who had been reading, looked up in consternation. "Quiet," he said in a voice of thunder. Instantly there was silence. Rufus ducked his head in alarm, and the others made a show of bending over their work. A while ago they had been reciting Greek words: Ho Georgos, the farmer; Ho Lukos, the wolf; Ho Dendron, the tree; Ho Hippos, the horse, and so on. They were then supposed to write the words from memory. So now they went back to their tablets. Mucius whispered to Antonius, who sat next to him, "What's the matter with Rufus? He's stirring up trouble for himself." Antonius grinned. "He's mad at Caius," he whispered back. "Caius wouldn't let him study. He kept poking him in the back with his stylus." Mucius frowned. By the way, a stylus would be a sharp pen because they're scratching in the wax tablets. They would fill a tray with wax and then let it harden, and they take a sharp stylus and scratch in there. And that's what Caius was doing to Rufus. Mucius frowned. He had warned Caius again and again not to bother the others. Mucius was the class monitor, and the boys were supposed to mind him. But Caius didn't like minding anybody. Perhaps he thought he didn't have to because his father was the wealthy senator Vinicius. Caius was rough and strong, but he was not really mean. He had weaknesses for practical jokes. The trouble was, he didn't like it a bit when the joke was on him. His face had turned bright red when Rufus hung up the sign. Now, finally, he lost all control of himself. "And you're the son of a coward," he bellowed at Rufus. Xanthippus looked up, dumbfounded. "I am the son of a coward?" he asked, frowning. "What do you mean by that?" Before Caius could explain, the whole room was in an uproar. Rufus adored his father, and Caius's insulting words had touched a tender spot. His father, Marcus Praetonius, was a famous general, but he had just recently lost an important battle somewhere in Gaul, and Rufus felt deeply humiliated. "You're a liar," he shouted, and made a rush at Caius. Caius was knocked backward, along with his bench. Grappling, the two boys rolled on the floor while the others jumped up on their benches to get a better view of the fracas. This was as good as any gladiator fight in the arena. Suddenly, Xanthippus took command of the situation. He went over to the boys, managed to get between them, and pulled them to their feet. Panting, Caius and Rufus glared at one another. Rufus's tunic was ripped at the collar, and Caius's toga had gathered up most of the dirt from the floor. As for Xanthippus, he was furious. "Mucius," he said, breathing heavily from the effort of separating the fighters. "What in the world brought on this disgusting conduct? Fighting in school! Disgraceful!" Xanthippus was a Greek, and his real name was Xanthos. Xanthippus was only a nickname the boys had given him because he reminded them of Xantippe, the wife of the famous philosopher Socrates, who was always bad-tempered and nagged her husband. The boys thought their teacher also was a terrible nagger. He always insisted on hard work and perfect conduct. Unlike most teachers, however, he never beat the boys. He had other ways of making them respect him. He had some peculiar ideas too. For example, he would not allow the slaves who brought the boys to school to stay on during the lessons, as was the custom. Xanthippus made the slaves leave and come back for the boys in the evening. Boys could not keep their minds on their studies when there were others around, he said. What was more, Xanthippus was in a position to lay down the law in such matters. He was a famous mathematician who had written many books about circles, triangles, diagonals, parallelograms, and such like head-splitting stuff. His school, known as the Xanthos School, was one of the finest grammar schools in Rome. Only wealthy patricians could afford to send their sons to it. For that reason, Xanthippus's classes were generally small. At present, the school consisted of only 7 boys: Mucius, Caius, Rufus, Publius, Julius, Flavius, and Antonius. All of them happened to live fairly close together in their neighborhood of elegant mansions on the Esquiline Hill. Rome is made up of 7 hills, and this is one where some of the wealthy kids would live in, would be the Esquiline Hill. And also, it talks about, never mind, I'll keep going. Xanthippus was still waiting for Mucius to account for the fight. "What's the matter with you?" he snapped. "Have you lost your tongue?" Mucius pulled himself together. "I can't see how it happened," he said hesitantly. I was writing the Greek words and wasn't paying attention to much else." Xanthippus couldn't very well fault with Mucius for that. "We were all doing our work," Antonius said rashly. Xanthippus became suspicious. He bore down on Rufus and said, "Show me your list of Greek words immediately." I haven't done it," Rufus stammered. "Why not?" Xanthippus demanded icily. I was having writer's cramp," Rufus murmured feebly. It was a silly excuse, but the boys thought Rufus was a good sport for not telling on Caius. He could have said that Caius's pestering had kept him from writing. "Indeed, writer's cramp," Xanthippus repeated with evident disbelief. He turned to Caius. "And what about you?" he asked. "Me?" Caius pretended amazement. "Yes, you? You think I mean Romulus and Remus? Where is your word list? I have none, Caius mumbled, shrugging. Why not? I just couldn't remember any of them, Caius sighed. He seemed almost offended that Xanthippus should expect him to remember. I'll teach you a lesson you'll not forget, Xanthippus snorted. Fighting in class instead of attending to your work. Which one of you started it? Caius and Rufus did not reply. Aha, Xanthippus said. So you want to be heroes, huh? You force me to take severe measures. He pointed his forefinger like a drawn dagger at Rufus and asked slyly, well, what were you doing at the wall behind my back? Speak, Rufus Marius Pretonius. Still, Rufus did not answer. He merely gawked at his teacher. Xanthippus whirled around and scanned the wall. He caught sight of the writing tablet on which was scribbled, Caius is a dumbbell, and exploded. Ha! So that is what you were up to. I thought you had writer's cramp. You just wait, my boy. I see you don't know me. You've been fooling around instead of working. You've raised a rumpus in the classroom, and on top of it all, you've lied to me. Pack your things at once and go. The Xanthos School is no wrestling ring for undisciplined young Romans. Tomorrow, I shall see your mother and ask her to withdraw you from the school. I'll return the money she has paid for your tuition. You are not worth all your parents are spending on you. After this outburst, he ordered the others to return to their seats and get to work, but he had not forgotten Caius. And as for you, tomorrow you will bring in the whole assignment with every word in the list written 10 times in your best handwriting, he snapped. And woe betide you if I find a single mistake. Without another word, Xanthippus returned to his desk, where he became absorbed in his book. He did not deign to look at Rufus. Caius sat down, flushed with anger, but Rufus stood petrified, staring in horror at the teacher. The others stole glances at him. Rufus had always been particularly proud of being a student at the famous Xanthos School. His parents placed great hopes in him. The high tuition fee was a real burden for them, for his father was far from rich. It took a great deal of money to equip his legions. Those are his soldiers. He's a general. Suddenly, Rufus ran up to the teacher's desk and cried out imploringly, Please, don't go to my mother tomorrow. Punish me some other way, but not that. Xanthippus waved him irritably aside. Your repentance comes too late, he grumbled. He did not even look up from his book. Behind the outstretched roll of papyrus, only his tousled gray hair and pointed beard could be seen. Slowly, Rufus walked back to his teacher and gathered up his school equipment, which had fallen to the floor during his fight with Caius. During the brawl, Mucius's lantern had also fallen to the floor, and he had forgotten to pick it up. It was a handsome bronze lantern with his name, Mucius Marius Domitius, engraved on it. Rufus packed it up with the rest of his things, not realizing his own lantern had rolled under the bench. Mucius noticed the mistake, but he did not want to trouble Rufus about it now. Now, remember, this chapter is called The Wrong Lantern. That might be a clue. After he had finished packing up, Rufus slowly put on his mantle. It was a homespun woolen cloak, somewhat too short for him. The mantle had a long tear on the left shoulder, which had been neatly darned with darker wool. Rufus gave one last pleading look at Xanthippus, who refused to take further notice of him. Then he unhappily stepped out into the street. The Xanthos School was located on Broad Street, a bustling, busy avenue by day. Nearby was the crowded Roman Forum with its orator's platform and its many public buildings, temples, and monuments. The Forum was famous throughout the world. Everyone thought of it as the heart of the Roman Empire. Because Broad Street was an elegant business street, Xanthippus had considered it a desirable location for his school. He had rented a small house for that purpose. The schoolroom was on the ground floor and open for its entire width on the side street, so that the boys were practically on public display. But they had long ago become accustomed to that, and passerby paid little attention to them. The sight of pupils at their studies was quite familiar. Many low-cost schools, in fact, were held in public arcades, just public areas, public spaces. The Xantho School was not exactly popular in the neighborhood. Lessons began before sunrise, and the voices of the boys at their recitations woke people from their sleep. But there was nothing to be done about that. After all, the boys were not attending school for their own pleasure, but in order to become educated men and fine citizens. Rufus started down Broad Street toward the Forum, but he paused at the first corner and then took a seat on a wine barrel which was chained to the wall in front of a tavern. Mucius, from his bench in school, could see Rufus plainly and wondered why he was sitting there so long. Again, clues. These are all clues. Had he already forgotten his troubles? He seemed to be showing a lively interest in the throng on the street. The sun had set behind Janiculus Hill, one of the other hills, and it was growing dark. A few stars could already be seen in the cloudless sky. Broad Street was jammed with people, most of whom came from the nearby baths on the field of Mars, their sandals slapped against the stone pavement. Scraps of conversation and laughter could now and then be distinguished from the hum of voices. Beggars crouching by the curb pleaded with passerby for alms. A few street peddlers shouted themselves hoarse, trying to dispose of their wares before dark. Hot sausages, figs dipped in honey, olives, fruit cakes, and other tidbits at bargain prices. A detachment of the Praetorian Guard, wearing chest armor and shouldering bamboo lances, marched past in military order, led by a young officer with sword and plumed helmet. Right behind them came a large farm wagon drawn by two sturdy mules. It was piled high with produce. Its clumsy wheels made a deafening racket on the rough pavement. The wagon stopped just in front of the school, for approaching it from the other direction came a sedan chair carried by 8 slaves in magnificent livery. The street was blocked, and instantly a crowd gathered. The runner, who was clearing the way for the sedan chair, struck out rudely with his stick, shouting, "Make room for His Excellency! Make room for His Excellency!" The crowd drew back, and the farmer drove his wagon halfway up onto the narrow sidewalk in order to give the sedan chair room to pass. Inside the chair sat a fat, bald-headed man wearing a senator's toga with 2 red bands. He was reading a book and fanning himself with an oriental fan. Apparently, he was a very high dignitary, for he had an unusually large following of slaves and admirers. The people on the street called out loud greetings to him, and some others even rushed up to kiss his hands. Others cracked jokes that called forth roars of laughter. When the fat man looked up, Mucius recognized him by the large scar that ran diagonally across his bald pate. He was ex-consul Tellus. Many years ago, he had been a top-ranking general. Now he was supposed to be living in luxurious retirement on the many millions that he had made out of the booty of his successful campaigns. That's treasure, things that he took when he defeated other lands and other armies and other civilizations. As the slaves trotted on with the sedan chair, Tellus waved his fan graciously at the crowd. Then he disappeared from Mucius's sight. The farm wagon started up again and lumbered off toward the Forum. Lucky that heavy wagons aren't allowed into the city by day, Mucius thought. With the streets so narrow, they would be bottling up traffic all the time. Now, there was really nothing left to see. The bustle on the street was beginning to quiet down. Only a few stragglers hastened by. obviously intending to get home as quickly as possible before nightfall. The beggars and peddlers had disappeared. Two night watchmen with long staffs over their shoulders came into sight across the street. They sauntered from shop to shop, making sure that the shutters in front of each were well locked. Rufus was still sitting on the wine barrel, staring into space. Perhaps he was waiting for school to let out when the slaves would come along to take the boys home. They were due any moment now, but suddenly he sprang to his feet, sped across the street, and disappeared around a corner into a side street that led past the field of Mars to the big bridge across the Tiber. The Tiber is the river that goes right through the middle of Rome. Still there. Mucius, watching, thought this odd behavior. If Rufus intended to go home, he would have to cross the Forum, but he was heading in the opposite direction. Okay, he's headed in the opposite direction. These are all clues. I hope you're taking note of these. It was already quite late. The first hour of the night had begun, and nobody liked walking through the totally dark streets alone at night. I suppose he just means to go by a roundabout way, Mucius said to himself. He certainly won't be in a hurry to see his mother tonight. This seemed as good an explanation as any, and Mucius at last applied himself to that dull list of Greek words. Within a few minutes, all thought of Rufus were gone from his mind. That was chapter 1. Chapter 2 for later, we'll do that tomorrow, is called A Muffled Groan. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I know I sure did. It's getting a little late here with a time change and all. You know, in Italy, it's different than where you are in Colton. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, folks. Be good out there. Stay safe and wash your hands. Bye-bye.